want to tell you of a memory that I have growing up. Every time that there was Christmas or that there was a birthday, I'll never forget, my mother would always sit me down after the Christmas season was over, or perhaps after my birthday was over, and she would sit me down with a stack of cards and a pen, and she would say to me, now, Dan, I want you to write a thank you note to every single person that gave you a present. And so it didn't matter if it was an amazing gift. It didn't matter if it was a gift that I was just like, it was okay. She didn't mind. She said, every single gift that you get, I want you to make sure that you write a thank you note. And perhaps that you have done this in your own life. I know that I've been to wedding showers and I've been to baby showers. And have you ever seen when the folks are opening their gifts, there will be that person that's kind of there on the side. It's usually a really good friend. I know my wife has done this for a couple of our friends, where you just have that person off to the side and they're writing down what the gift was, and they're writing who gave the gift. And so they're able to give that list back to those who received it, and so that they can write a thank you card and for each person that gave them something. And I tell you something, it is good for us to show our appreciation. It is polite for us to show our appreciation. I mean, as a matter of fact, people have gone out of their way. Think about, they go out of their way to get you something many times that maybe they had to stop by the store after work or maybe order something online. And so people have certainly gone out of their way to give a blessing. And so it's important for us to say thank you. But here's what I want us to see today is that God wants us to be so much more than polite. I think a lot of times when we think of saying thanks, saying please and saying thank you and all that kind of stuff, I think a lot of times that saying those things can kind of get pushed into this category of just merely being polite. And I want us to understand, especially as we go into Thanksgiving this week, that our God is wanting so much more than for us to just be polite. That He's wanting it to be something that overflows in our heart. God desires a gratitude that flows from the heart, not just from the hand. I think about my thank you notes. And while thank you notes acknowledge the giver, sometimes they can become a routine gesture and a task that we're just, okay, I've got to check these things off my list. I want to put a key truth up here on the screen just as we get started this morning. And that is this, is that true gratitude, the kind that God is seeking from us, that God is seeking for us, not just 1 week a year, but the kind of gratitude that God is seeking that our hearts would have all the time. It isn't just transactional. Do you know what I mean when I say transactional? It's not just routine. It's not just going through the motions. The gratitude that our God is seeking from us is transformational. It's something that it's not just something that we do. It's in the core of our being. It's who we are. And so today, I want us to look at a story that is in your Bible in Luke chapter 17 that reveals to us a man who saying thank you was so much more than a transaction. It was because he had experienced transformation. As we'll see today, he experienced transformation in more than one way. And so I want you to look with me right here in verse 11 of chapter 17. It says, "Now on his way to Jerusalem, Jesus traveled along the border between Samaria and Galilee." Now, there's a couple of things that I want you to understand here. I want you to look up here on the screen, because I think sometimes we can hear of these places in the New Testament. We can hear of these different regions, and sometimes we don't know where those regions are or what those regions represent. And so it talks about him here that he's moving between the area of Galilee and Samaria, just right there on that border. And up here on the screen, you can kind of see Galilee is in the northern northern part of Israel. And so you got it right up there, and you've got it in that yellow section. And then you've got this area, this region of Samaria right here in blue. And then you've got some other regions, but all of this is west of the Jordan River. And this is where Jesus did the vast majority of his ministry. So I want you to picture where he is. He's right there on the edge of the yellow and the blue. Now, something that this verse said, if you look in your text, it says that Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem. Now, there's something important about this that I want you to understand. And that is this, is that anytime that you are reading one of the Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, and maybe you're halfway through the book or maybe towards the end of the book, anytime that you see that Jesus is on his way to Jerusalem, I want you to understand something very important. He's not just traveling. He's not on vacation. He is making his way to the cross. He knows that he's making his way to the cross. We don't have time to go there today, but if you were to turn the page and go to Luke chapter 18, he tries to explain to his disciples, I'm going to be crucified, I'm going to die, I'm going to be resurrected on the third day, and they do not understand. They don't understand what's going on. But Jesus very much understands that this trip that he is on is going to lead him to the cross. So imagine how much more sobering this journey is for Jesus than it may be for any other person that is on this trip with him. And then look at what happens in verse 12. So as he was going into a village, 10 men who had leprosy met him, and they stood at a distance. I'm going to come back to that. And called out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. Now, the reason that they were at a distance with Jesus wasn't just something that just happened where they kind of look in the distance and they're trying to call Jesus and get his attention. Wasn't something, oh, there he is. That's Jesus. Let me call to him. Let me reach out to him. No, the reality was, for people who had leprosy, this was a contagious skin disease. It was so contagious, as a matter of fact, that they had to live a life of isolation. They had to be away from their family. They could no longer live with their family anymore. They could no longer be around normal society anymore. They could no longer work a job anymore. They had to completely isolate. And the reason that you've got 10 lepers is because they're already suffering from this disease. And so they can't infect one another. And so here they are. And the whole reason that they're calling out to Jesus at a distance is because they were not allowed to go near anyone. And so just picture being away from your family. Not just for a long time, like a month. Not just like 2 months. Imagine that you couldn't come to church. Just picture that. Imagine that you couldn't come to church. Not just for a short season, but imagine that you couldn't come, because this was a disease that was going to kill you if you weren't healed. And so I want you to feel the weight of what it says when it says they stood at a distance and they cried out, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. In verse 14, it says that when he saw them, he said, go and show yourself to the priests. And as they went, they were cleansed. Now, back in this day and age, of course, they didn't have any dermatologists. Now they had some medicines and some oils and things that they could put on their skin, some salves, if you will, that they could put on their skin. But there were no doctors that really dealt with this particular disease or that even wanted to deal with someone like this. And so here they are. It says, go and show yourself to the priest. This actually will take you all the way back in the Old Testament to Leviticus chapters 13 and 14, where if you had a skin disease and you had to be isolated from family and friends, but somehow you were healed, you went and showed yourself to a priest. And that priest declared you clean. And that priest said, yes, now you can go home to your family. And then it goes on right here in verse 15. It says, one of them When he saw that he was healed, he came back praising God in a loud voice. So 9 are continuing to go on to the priest, but one of them looks at himself and says, oh my goodness, I have been completely healed. And he came back and he's praising God in a loud voice. Verse 16, he threw himself at Jesus' feet and he thanked him. And then don't miss it. It's got it right here kind of as a little side note. And he was a Samaritan. You know, I think about how our country in a couple of years is getting ready to celebrate our 250th anniversary. Can you believe that? That since 1776 has gone, man, it's just, to think back, George Washington, you know, that just feels so long ago to think of what our country was 250 years ago. But can I tell you, if you were to go back from this point in time, that where they were, Jesus being on earth and doing his ministry, if you were to go back almost triple that time, 700, it would have been about 722 BC, there was friction between the people, the Jewish people, and the Samaritans. And this animosity and this friction didn't go back 250 years. This animosity went back over 700 years between the different nations. Because what had happened was the nation of Assyria had come down, they had come into Israel, and they had taken over the area of Samaria. Remember the area that we were looking at earlier on the map? And so they had taken over this area of Samaria, and they had carted off all the important people and all the nobles and things like that. And they left in the area of Samaria, they left all the peasants and all the people. And what happened is the Assyrians came down and they started to intermarry with these people that were left. And so for years, hundreds of years, these guys were known as half-breeds. And I know we've talked about over the years even in our own country, the racism that happens in our day and age. But let me tell you, it has absolutely nothing on the things that they experienced in their day and age. And so here he is, it says, and he was a Samaritan. That is significant when he is coming to Jesus, who is a Jew, and saying, thank you. In verse 17, it says, Jesus asked, were not all 10 cleansed? Where are the other 9? Was no one found to return and give praise to God except this foreigner? And then look at what he says in verse 19. He says, and then he said to him, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. And the other men, I want you to understand, the other 9, they had faith. They were filled, and they were, you know what? They were probably so excited to get back to their families. They were probably so excited to get back into society. I mean, the whole time, they were as the same. They were filled. But here's what I want you to understand. I got a little analogy for you this morning, if you don't mind. I'm going to bring this up here. There's a difference for us, especially as we go into this Thanksgiving. There's a difference for us of being filled and being overflowing with Thanksgiving. And so the other 9, I want you to see right here, the other 9, I've got my little cup right here. They were filled. They walked by faith. They believed Jesus. They believed that what he said was true. And so here they are. They were filled, but there was one out of the whole group that wasn't just filled with thanksgiving, that he was literally overflowing with thanksgiving. And that's what I want us to think about this morning as we look into these passages and as we take just a few notes about this. The first thing that I want you to understand is that a true gratitude towards God, as we overflow with that gratitude, recognizes his grace. It recognizes his grace. This is one of the attributes that shows true gratitude towards God, that doesn't just fill our heart, but that overflows our heart. Now, I don't know about you, But this week, I have been getting all kinds of notifications on my phone. My phone has been dinging off the hook, different notifications from the different apps that I have on my phone. And to be completely honest with you, I've had to turn off some of my notifications on my phone. Do you want to know what these notifications are? They're all about the Black Friday deals that are coming up at the end of this week. They're saying, yeah, you've been getting them too. And you're like, stop it. I know what Friday is. I know what's going on. And I've just been getting all these notifications on my phone. And so many apps that will do that. And what they're trying to do is they're trying to get you to buy the gifts. They're trying to get you to buy gifts and maybe that they're for yourself. Maybe that you're like, oh, this needs to be Christmas for myself, They're trying to entice you for the wants. Very rarely do I go into the shopping season, even if I'm buying something for someone else. Very rarely am I thinking about needs. It all seems to be about people's wants. And here's what I want you to understand here this morning, is that these men were 100% desperate. Their healing wasn't just a want in their life. Their healing was a 100% need in their life. Look at what it says in verse 12. We'll look at it one more time. So he's going into this village and it says that they stand at a distance, verse 13, and they call out in a loud voice, Jesus, Master, have pity on us. That's not a dinging notification on Jesus's phone. He didn't have phones back then, but that wasn't a want. That was an absolute need. Jesus, we are bankrupt unless you help us out. And so this one in particular recognized his grace. I want you to understand, these men were literally and physically falling apart. This disease was going to kill them. And a lot of times, I don't know if you know much about leprosy. Leprosy, a lot of times what would happen is the fingers would fall off. It would just begin to erode your fingers. It would erode your toes. Many times they had trouble walking. Facial features. A lot of times they would wear something over their face because it would begin to erode their nose. And sometimes that their nose would literally be gone. And so I want you to understand that these men were absolutely bankrupt. And can I just be honest, as I was studying this passage this week, and I was trying to say, okay, God, how do you want to apply this to my life? As I was writing the sermon, can I just be honest with you? I got deeply emotional. There's a portion of when I was just reading, have mercy, have pity on me. And I just put my head in my hands. Because for these men, everything in their life had fallen apart. Everything had fallen apart. And I thought about my life and I thought about the things of my past and the things that had taken place in my life. I don't know about you, but I've had moments in my life where I felt like everything was falling apart. Remember a car accident when I was 16 years old that I should have died. But that for some reason the car spun around and I hit that brick wall backwards. And God protected me. I think about when I was struggling to find a job. And it just felt like everything in life was falling apart financially, all of that. And God showed up for me. I particularly think back to the times before God really got a hold of my heart. I mean, I went to church. I mean, I went through the routine, but there was this moment before God got a hold of my heart that I was just desperate in my sin. And I got to this place where I just felt like life was falling apart. And in the midst of God's grace, He picked me up in my sin, in my rebellion. And just as these men had to be separated from society, you know, they're yelling at Jesus from a distance. How many times I thought about this? Man, Lord, I remember the moment that I felt so separated from you. You know, before we become a Christian, before we know Christ is our Savior, before we have our sins forgiven, maybe that we don't have leprosy, but the reality is we're separated from Jesus. We're separated from knowing Him. We're separated from a relationship with Him. And in the way that these lepers, they could not be near Jesus. I thought about in the own times in my own life that I said, God, thank you so much for your grace. Thank you so much for healing me of my sin and my past. And all of those things, because God, without your grace, I would still be separated from you. And here's what I want us to understand is that grace is not something that you can earn. These men could not earn their health. There's nothing that they could do. Grace, understand, because we talk about grace, and I feel like different churches talk about grace in different ways. But the biblical definition of grace is that you cannot earn it under any circumstances. It is 100% a gift. So here we understand that true gratitude towards God recognizes His grace. The second thing that I want you to write down this morning is that true gratitude towards God requires our action. Requires our action. Now, there's 2 points that I want to make here. The first is in another sermon for another day, but it's these men, they took action. I want you to know, Jesus didn't heal them right there on the spot by saying, you're healed. Jesus called them to put their faith in practice. Jesus didn't say, you're healed. Jesus looked at them and said, go show yourself to the priests. See, they had to take a step of faith themselves. And it's when they took that step of faith, they were healed. Let's just look at it. I tell you what, let's just look right here in verse 14. It says, when He saw them, this is what He says. He says, go show yourself to the priest. So they had to take their own step of faith. And as they did, they were cleansed. So they had to show action in their faith. I want you to understand this. Again, another time that we can go through this. But if you want to be a person that experiences God's moving and His miracles in your life, you got to be ready not just to believe it cognitively. You've got to be able to walk it in action. But what I also want you to see is that the Samaritan, the one guy who came back to Jesus, he had his own form of action. He didn't just look at his skin and be able to see. Maybe fingers were growing back right there at that moment. Maybe toes were growing back as he was hobbling away towards the priest. But here's what I want you to understand. As he's looking, he didn't just have a heart of gratitude. He said, man, I gotta express it. He was overflowing. He says, I've got to take this as a form of action, and true gratitude takes action. And he goes back and look at what happens in verse 15. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, I love this. This isn't just two random words in the passage. He came back. He took action. He came back praising God in a loud voice. 1 out of 10 returned. Why? Maybe that the others were celebrating that they're healing. Maybe that they were saying, yes, I'm excited about rejoining society. But gratitude moves beyond our feelings. It's so much more than just a feeling. Gratitude goes beyond that, and it calls us to action. Because gratitude is never passive. It requires us to respond. Let me give you a great example that just hit me this past week. I saw it this week. I said, that's it. That's exactly what I'm talking about. I'm going to show you a picture up here on the screen. In this picture, this is a guy, his name, he's a military service member. He's not in uniform right there, but his name is Juan Sacato. And Juan Sacato is hugging the mother of Gabriel Lopez. Now, let me tell you what happened. Let me tell you what's going on. And this is a family that lives in Arizona. And Gabriel, who you don't see in this picture, he was on his way to school one day. He's 18 years old and he's driving to school. And something happened where he lost control of his vehicle. And when he lost control of his vehicle, he had such a bad accident that he completely lost consciousness, and it was taking time. It takes a little bit of time for the paramedics to get there. Well, Jawan was there close enough. He had been in military service, so he knew some of the things in order to do. He runs over to the car that has Gabriel in it and a couple of his friends. And as I read the article, it talked about how he was able to use his pocket knife to free them from the wreckage. I don't know if he just had trouble getting him out of the seatbelt and trying to get him out of the car to free him from the wrecked car. Well, he was able to get him out of the car just in time so that the paramedics could come and to work on him. Now, this whole time, Gabriel has lost consciousness. Of no effort of his own is he able to save himself. And so after he goes to the hospital, he's been in the hospital for about a week or two, and the entire family, and you can see, do you see in the background? That's a big family. The entire family reached out to Jawan because they said, will you come up to the hospital? We want, in fact, those balloons that are in their hand are for him. They gave him this set of balloons, and they said, without you, we might not have our son. We might not have our cousin. We might not have our grandchild. And the entire family called to action. They said, we can't just let more time go by and just have a feeling of thanks. We can't just have this, just a simple heart of gratitude, although that's important. We have to reach out in action, and we have to say thank you. And you know what? As I thought about that, I thought about, man, again, this is not our story as well. Gabriel was completely incapacitated. He was unconscious. There was no way he was going to save himself. At no merit of his own was he going to be able, after that car accident, to unbuckle his seatbelt. He was going to be able to get the car door open. In fact, if you go and you can actually watch this, you can watch it online. In fact, the article talks about how his face his whole jaw was wired shut. So even in that moment, he wasn't, because of his injuries, wasn't even able to communicate. Even if he was able to communicate, even if he was conscious. And I thought to myself, isn't that what God does with us? I couldn't save myself. I was completely incapacitated with my sin. I was completely distraught. There was no way. And nevertheless, Jesus saved me. Ladies and gentlemen, I know that there's a common thread that says, you know what, you just need to be a good person to go to heaven. There's that you need to, not kick little kids and not, help old ladies walk across the street, be generally a good person. But ladies and gentlemen, I want you to understand that is entirely false. There is nothing you can do to save yourself. And the same way that the family reached out in action to say thank you, that God requires us to take action and say thank you. Look at this, Hebrews, I'll put it up here on the screen, Hebrews 13, 15, and 16. Hebrews chapter 13, verses 15 and 16, it says, through Jesus, therefore, let us continually offer. The reason I have that highlighted in yellow is because it's not just a one-time event. Let us continually offer to God a sacrifice of praise, the fruit of the lips that openly profess His name. And do not forget to do good and to share with others, for with such sacrifices God is pleased. How often do you tell God thank you? Do you just tell Him thank you for a meal when it's socially appropriate? Or every day are you saying, Lord, thank you? Thank you for my salvation. Thank you for my family. Are you constantly going to Him in action? And then there's one last thing that I want us to look at right before we go, is that true gratitude towards God returns us to worship. It returns us to worship. Now, the reason I worded it that way is because right here, I want us to see that that this Samaritan, he returned, but he didn't just return to say thank you. He returned to worship. Look at this. One of them, verse 15, we looked at this earlier. One of them, when he saw that he was healed, he came back praising God. Do you see the worship? Praising God in a loud voice. Now, don't miss this. It's easy to gloss over. In verse 16, it says, he threw himself at Jesus' feet and thanked him, and he was a Samaritan. And the reason I want you to capture this is because now he's recognized that he has been healed. And because he has been healed, don't miss it, he's no longer required to be at a distance. Now he can come and worship in Jesus' presence. Do you see it? At one time, he was required to be far away, but because Jesus has healed him, now he can be in Jesus' presence. And so certainly that he has been separated by family and friends and his children and perhaps his wife, and maybe he hasn't seen his parents. But with all the excitement of going back to normal life, true gratitude drives him to worship. I want you to get this. This man isn't just merely being polite. He wasn't just seeking God's blessings. Sometimes I would phrase it this way. Do we seek God's hand for his blessings in our life? Or do we seek his face? Do we want Jesus for what he can give us? Or do we want Jesus for himself, for ourselves? See, that's the real question. It's for us. And so then Jesus responds in verse 19. Because of that worship, he says this. He says, rise and go. Your faith has made you well. Now, there's something interesting going on. Maybe that if you've got a physical Bible here this morning, that you put a little note out of there. This phrase right here, made you well, is the Greek word sozo. And it literally means to be saved. So literally, Jesus is saying, rise and go. Your faith has saved you. And so while the other 9 have gone to show themselves to the priests, here's what I want you to understand, is that this Samaritan experienced 2 healings that day. The first healing was of his skin, but the second healing was because of his sin. Did you grasp it? The first healing was his skin. The second healing was of his sin. Because in that moment, he realized that only Jesus can save my soul. And that's why Jesus says, your faith has made you well. Every commentary that I looked picks up this point that says that his soul was actually saved. And as I thought about this, I thought about, how many times when we read a Bible story, do we tend to put ourselves in the lead character's role? Think about David and Goliath. Don't we hear sermons on, capturing or killing the giants in your life, overcoming the giants in your life. And so we tend to put ourselves in the role of David, right? Or maybe Moses, when Moses, he parted the Red Sea, and we tend to put ourselves in the place of Moses, who is parting the Red Sea. We're not putting ourselves in the place of the Israelites who are all wringing their hands and freaking out. We don't want to put ourselves in their role. And God spoke to my heart as I was reading this passage this week. He says, Dan, so many times we put ourselves in the role of the one who has said thank you, when the truth is we need to put ourselves in the other 9 who are just simply grateful but keep going. They weren't truly saved because of what Jesus has done. And so for ourselves this morning, I ask you this morning, in your own life and in your own heart, are you just grateful? Or have you gone to Jesus in faith and said, Jesus, only you can save my soul. Only you can cleanse my sin. Have you experienced what the Samaritan did? So we close today. I want to put this picture up here on the screen. I don't know if you've ever gotten a picture like this from your kids. This isn't a picture actually from one of my kids, but it is very similar to something that they might draw. Let me tell you something. When your kids, or perhaps your grandkids, or nieces and nephews draw you a picture like this, I mean, even though it's not perfect, I mean, it means more to us, especially if you're a parent here today, than the most beautiful Da Vinci painting, if you were to ever have that in your house, because of the relationship that you share. When I look at this picture, I just don't see imperfect lines, or I don't see a child who is colored outside the lines. I see the love behind it. And that's what makes a picture like this so priceless. And here's what I want you to understand as we go today, is that's what God desires from us. He isn't looking for extravagant displays or flawless deeds. What God desires most from us is the heart behind our gratitude. The heart that says, I love you. I'm not just seeking your blessings. I'm seeking you. It's not just His hand. It's His face. It's a thankfulness that's not done out of duty or obligation. It's about relationship. See, the Samaritan leper, he got it right. He didn't just receive a gift from Jesus and then walk away. He came back. He fell at His feet. He worshiped. Why? Grab this. Because he wasn't just thankful for the healing. He was thankful for the healer. And this week, I want us to just not reflect on what we're thankful for. I want us to reflect on who we're thankful to. For us to return to the feet of Jesus with hearts that are full of love and gratitude, and let our relationship with Him grow deeper and grow richer than ever before. That's the heart of true gratitude. And that's the gift that matters most to our God.